New wealth isn't coming into the region. What we have is what economists call a zero-sum game. One person is $1 worse off, and someone else is $1 better off in the region. But there's been no growth. There's just been an exchange of money. And in fact, the casinos are anticipating, or issue 3 proposers are anticipating, that there'll be about $2 billion of revenue at the 4 casinos. Again, you can look at it as $4 billion of revenue, or you can look at it as $4 billion of loss, because the loss is going to come from the citizens in the region. That's where the $2 billion of revenues in the casinos comes from. So it's really an exchange of money. It's not economic growth. As a result of that, we think any multiplier that's going to occur will be minuscule, if any multiplier occurs at all. There will be no need for a new grocery store down the street and a new theater because the population is growing as a result of casinos. In fact, as I'll mention in a moment, just the opposite would seem to be the case. The third issue that we looked at was the issue of the licenses. And we find that the $50 million license fee to be somewhat perplexing. And in the report, if you have an opportunity to look at it, you'll see that we recommend that if the state is to have casinos, that they auction the licenses off to the highest bidders. As we looked around, we found licenses in other states that were selling for substantially more. In fact, there's a casino we understand that's being negotiated in Illinois. The price that's being negotiated right now is in the neighborhood of $350 to $400 million. So an auction would find the true cost of these licenses. We found it perplexing that the proposal to put the video terminals into the racetrack, the governor's proposal, those licenses would cost $65 million and were good for 10 years. We couldn't quite understand why to put slot machines in the racetracks required $65 million for 10 years, but to have full casinos was $50 million, and they were good without a limit. There was no renewal necessary. We found that confusing at best, and thought that the best way to resolve this would be to simply put any licenses up for auction. Clearly, they won't all sell for the same amount. I would suspect that the licenses in Cleveland, for example, where you've got the population of not only Cuyahoga County, but you've got the metropolitan areas in Lorraine, Summit County, the Akron area, they've got a fairly large population base. I would think that license, I would think the license in Columbus, where you've got a fairly large population base, would simply sell for more than a license in Toledo. Simply because there's more population in the Cleveland metropolitan, Cleveland, Akron, Lorraine metropolitan area, more population in Columbus than there is in Toledo. And so I guess it's the economics part of us coming out and saying, let the free market decide what these licenses are worth, put them up for auction and sell them to the highest bidder. We suspect that the highest bidder would pay considerably more than $50 million for those rights. The fourth thing that we looked at was the tax rate. Issue 3 provides a 33% return to the political subdivisions in the state of Ohio, the school districts, the counties, the state, the cities. We looked at a number of studies. In particular, we looked at one by Professor Grunol out of Texas, who estimated what the social cost is of a casino. That is, what is the cost in terms of addiction and a number of other things. And his estimates are that the true cost of a casino, when you look at the cost that forces government to bear, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 to 70%. Ought to be the tax rate. we found that interesting, and we began to look then and said, well, let's take the midpoint of his study, which would be around 57%. And we were fascinated by that because we looked to the east and saw Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania's rate is 55%. So his mid-range of 57 is quite close to, in fact, what the Pennsylvania rate is. First to 33. Now, 33 to 55 or 57% doesn't sound like a lot of money, but when you apply it to $2 billion, it would generate another $473 million each year to the state of Ohio. That's a pretty sizable figure. I would think the governor would be interested in $473 million each year. It would perhaps solve some of the problems he has today. So we were questioning why would Ohio have a tax rate on a casino of 33%, while our neighbors in Pennsylvania had one of 55. In fact, the 55 seemed to be supported by the literature that we did review. The last item, well, really two more that I wanted to comment on, was the issue of job creation. The 34,000 jobs, 15,000 permanent, 19,000 temporary. We're just kind of confused by that. None of the four of us that did the study are in the construction industry, but it didn't appear to us that it required 19,000 people to build 4 buildings. And the only way we could ascertain that 19,000 jobs would be created would be if some of those jobs were counted, where someone shows up for a week, works on the building, and never returns. They would be counted as having been there for a week in the construction trade and left. These cannot possibly be 19,000 temporary jobs that are of a year's duration or something. The payroll alone would be in the billions of dollars. The permanent jobs, the 15,000 permanent jobs for casinos, we also found perplexing. We looked at data from other states, and let me just give you some of that. If we've got 15,000 permanent jobs, then we're talking about in the neighborhood of 3,500 to 4,000 jobs per casino being permanent jobs. And as I said, we don't see a multiplier. We don't see a lot of things developing around these casinos. But we looked at Indiana, Pennsylvania, and Illinois, all of which are neighboring states with casinos. Pennsylvania recently built 2 new casinos. There's one on the eastern part of the state, I believe over near Harrisburg in that area, and there's one in Pittsburgh. And each of those casinos each employs in the neighborhood of 1,000 people permanently. In Indiana averages slightly more than 1,200 jobs per casino. And Illinois averages slightly less than 900 jobs per casino. So we have a difficult time understanding why a casino in Ohio would require almost 4,000 jobs when Pennsylvania, Indiana, and Illinois seem to run casinos without a great deal of difficulty with 1,000 jobs. What is the difference? We couldn't ascertain that there was something unique about Ohio that would require that additional employment.